Yao Yao has long since been the Dendro hero for free-to-play players. From being available for free every year from the Lantern Rite Selector to being great even at Constellation 0, Yao Yao is truly a staple Dendro unit and a staple for all free-to-plays. But is she still good enough to replace the more premium options long-term? Let's talk about whether or not she's worth it to build for your account and how to get the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Yao Yao is a 4-star Dendro healer and Dendro applicator, which is a very potent and valuable role consolidation combination. Her skill heals the active character a small amount and does a small amount of AoE Dendro damage. However, this damage being AoE Dendro application is very relevant for certain teams, such as Aggravate or Nilou team. For her elemental burst, she needs to dash or sprint to provide additional team-wide healing and AoE Dendro damage and application. Both her skill and burst are really useful and important parts of her kit depending on the team, as even though they provide really nothing more, but importantly, nothing less than what most teams need, the role consolidation of both healing and Dendro application. She's very free-to-play friendly in the sense that she has lots of flexible artifact and weapon choices. Her constellations are not that crazy, and her overall functionality is not at all locked behind them, even though they can provide some more options on how you build her. So let's talk about those next. Yao Yao C1 is the only one I would probably recommend going for if you're playing certain teams. If you're using her with Alhaitham, for example, giving the 15% Dendro bonus and restoring stamina is relevant. The stamina, not as much for Alhaitham in particular. It's not like he uses, I mean, he does use some charge attacks, so I guess it's kind of nice to give you extra dashes, but really the main thing is the additional damage bonus. It's still a loss using her over Nahida as a second Dendro in Alhaitham teams, but this definitely makes it less of a downgrade, especially if you are using her with Farina or something like that. So it's all right. It's pretty good. It'd be nice if it was an all type damage bonus so that it would also boost aggravate teams, because that's generally where Yao Yao is best, we'll talk about later, but it's still nice. The other problem with it is that when used with Nilou doesn't technically do Dendro damage. Even though the cores do Dendro damage, the Dendro damage bonus doesn't affect those cores. Only the elemental mastery of the Hydro characters and Nilou's HP affect those cores. So yeah, it's really only Alhaitham or maybe Tainari teams that this would affect. For C2, she gets an additional 3 energy when the explosions hit opponents. That's pretty nice. More energy is good. She definitely wants energy in a lot of teams to get her burst up. I end up running Fav and often AR Sands depending on what team I'm playing. So getting some extra energy is quite nice, allows you to build into some other stats, but often she doesn't need to build into that many stats, so it's not that big of a deal, but it's nice. Talent upgrade is fine, but not that useful since mainly it's just more healing. C4 is interesting. It increases her elemental mastery based on her max HP. This constellation maxes out when she gets to 40,000 HP. I don't usually find I have her quite to 40,000, so she's usually going to be getting closer to 100 elemental mastery, at least when you're building like full EM or something. Like obviously if you give her an HP Sands, but I think it's more worth it in general to just run the elemental mastery Sands because you get a lot more value out of that. But this is still a nice boost to Nilou teams. Even if you only get 80 or 100 elemental mastery, it's still a nice boost. And then more healing from the C5, extra damage and extra healing for C6. So I would say that C1, to some extent C2 and C4 are the biggest ones, really dependent on what teams you're running her in, but I wouldn't worry about necessarily getting them all. I was using her at C0 for a really long time and it was totally fine in all the teams that I'm going to show you today. And speaking of which, let's get into it. The first use for Yao Yao is on an aggravate team. She's perfectly suited for this because she perfectly consolidates AoE Dendro application, which is the most important thing of an aggravate team, because you want to take advantage of the aggravate swirls that you're using either with Kazuo or Sucrose. And your driver here is either going to be, like, you have lots of choices actually. Yai is the premier choice. She is the best choice. I kind of underestimated how powerful she was in comparison after doing a lot of testing with her. But Kaching's a really good choice as well if you prefer to use Kaching, or if you don't want to spend the resources to get Yai. I mean, it makes total sense to save your resources and go for something like Kaching. Sino does work, but Yao Yao's healing doesn't last long enough to go all the way through Sino's burst, so I don't prefer Sino. I do definitely prefer the other choices. I also prefer Lisa here. Lisa's quite good. In this Abyss, for whatever reason, I'm not able to get as good of clears with Lisa, but I think it's just a skill issue. I just need to work on her stacking mechanic a bit better. And obviously with C4, she really really improves a lot too. But if you're playing, but any of these teams honestly work great. Fischl is a must here, but Kazuha can definitely be switched out. You can swap Kazuha for Sucrose here, and that's totally fine. The other thing you can do is you can go for a second Animo character. You don't have to use an Electro. You can go for Venti if Venti's good in the Abyss. You can go for double Animo. You can go for both Kazuha and Sucrose, wherever he is. You can go for Hazo. You can go for whatever. The main point, if you do another Animo character, is you just have to be really cognizant of giving Fischl maximum uptime, because you really need that Dendro. And you also obviously do need to have Yao constantly using her skill. She doesn't need to use her burst in this team. You basically just want to use it if you need those emergency heals or Dendro application. Next team that comes to mind is a Nilou Bloom. Yao is perfect for Nilou Bloom because Nilou Bloom doesn't have a dedicated on-fielder that they really want to have. And Yao, the only thing that they really want for a Nilou Bloom team is to have more Dendro application so that you can keep up with Nahida so that Hydra doesn't overtake it. So Yao is perfect for that. She especially puts a lot of Dendro when she's on field, and she can heal more when she's on field using her burst. So that's really great. It's a great use for Candace. Candace feels awesome in this team, especially in AoE. If you go down to single target, Candace starts feeling less good, and in single target it's better to swap in something like Yelan or Xingqiu or even Farina, because you're on fielding with Yao. She can keep up with Farina on this particular team, so that's great. I know a lot of people laugh at me for using Yelan and Xingqiu on these Nilou teams, but it works great. I don't know what to say. You also can, of course, use Kokomi. You can use Barbara, and that works fine as well. Yeah, you have lots of choices. For the Candace variant, you need to make sure that Yao is built using full elemental mastery and Flowers of Paradise Lost or Gilded Dreams or whatever, so that because she will be the one proccing the blooms. She'll be the one infusing her normal attacks with Hydro from Candace and actually doing the bloom damage, which is really cool. It's a really cool mechanic. Candace will also be proccing blooms, so you'll want to build her on EM as well. And it's a really great team, especially in AoE. So yeah, highly recommend you keep this in your back pocket if you want, more Hydro options. The other nice thing about it is that it doesn't take up those valuable Hydro characters from your second team. It uses 2 much more lesser used units, so that's really nice. Next is Burn Melt. I don't love Burn Melt. I know I've seen it work. I've seen even Yao Burn Melt work. I've seen it with Bennett. I've seen it with a little bit of Rosaria. I've seen it with Dea. I've seen it with I've seen it with Nahida and Yao. I've seen all sorts of different variants. You can go look up Burn Melt Abyss Clears. I personally don't love it. I don't recommend it to people who don't know what they're doing. For whatever reason, I just haven't been able to get it. I know it does work. I've seen it work. I talked about it in my Risley guide. I even showed some clips in there, but I'm not going to recommend it here because I haven't really just been able to replicate it in a way that I like, but that doesn't mean it's not good. Just go check it out. The other thing you can do is use Yao as a second Dendro in an Alhaitham team, which I talked about. It doesn't have to be Farina, obviously. I just have her here because if you're using both Kuki and Yao, they can fully max out Farina. The problem is Farina is only buffing Alhaitham in this team, whereas she has the capacity to buff a second character, and you can just use Nahida with Prototype Amber to keep up with the healing, or you could just use Baiju, because Yaya's healing when she's just strictly off field, like she doesn't have a ton of time to be on field a lot in this team, so it's not my favorite, but it still works great. Like at the end of the day, it's still a Hyper Bloom team. It's just maybe you're kind of gimping yourself by not using Nahida, because Nahida does buff Alhaitham a lot as well, and provides a lot of Dendro particles for Alhaitham, so it doesn't have to build as much ER. So this definitely isn't my favorite Alhaitham team, but it's solid. The other thing you can do is Hopper Bloom. Now I talked about Hopper Bloom in my previous in my Farina 4-star only video, and I used Fischl in place of Yai, but Yai, if you have her, is even better. I didn't actually talk about this team in my Yaimiko guide, but it is a super funny, and I wouldn't say it's as good as other teams that you can build, but you're basically just on. This is a Yao on-fielder team, and it's an AFK team, so all you have to do is jump around with Yao. You don't have to normal attack. You never press A. You just jump, which is just the funniest thing in the world. Yaimiko's a little bit better than Fischl for this AFK playstyle, because Fischl wants you to do normal attacks, whereas Yai does not care. She just does her damage. You can use her burst whenever it's off cooldown. Farina is buffing Yaimiko here, which is nice. I've tried replacing Yaimiko with Nahida, because you can do this sort of like a different version of a Hyper Bloom team where you're normal attacking with Yao, but I don't like this nearly as much because Yao's healing is really not necessary in this team, so it's not my favorite. I prefer, if you're gonna do Yao Hyper Bloom, I recommend her being the substitute for Nahida, and then you can do Nahida on the other side, because on-field Yao has some solid Dendro application, so when combined with this kind of stuff, it's actually pretty good. So those are my Yao Yao teams. Overall, what do I think of her in terms of value and power? I think for power, she definitely, you know, she's worse than other options. I think the biggest hurdle she faces now is because it used to be Baiju would provide not only the healing, but also some resistance interruption, a little bit more buffing. Yao Yao can do buffing. I'll talk about her build in a minute. But the biggest thing is her lack of synergy with Farina. I know I suggested a couple of Farina teams, but she can't be the off-field healer for Farina because she just doesn't heal enough. She needs to get on field for Farina, for it to really feel like Farina pops off on those teams. So that's the biggest part where Yao Yao falls behind Baiju. But that being said, for teams like Aggravate, like this with Yaimiko, like I know I said in my Baiju guide that I like Baiju way more and it's way more comfy. I would never recommend, and I still stand behind that because it's nice having the shield and interruption resistance, and I would never recommend someone wish for Baiju for an Aggravate team, because even though I always use Baiju, I would never use Yao Yao over Baiju. Her healing is just enough and her Dendro application is arguably better. So I really, really like her in the Aggravate teams. So I think that this and the Nilou teams are where she shines the most. I think she's just very like replaceable and she's not often the ceiling option. Like I don't know if she's ever the ceiling option, but that's okay, right? That's kind of exactly where you want a free-to-play character to be. You want them to be a really good option for any of your teams so that you don't feel ever forced to get a higher end character, but she's not the ceiling option. So, you know, you actually feel good about wishing for your limited 5-star that ends up supporting her. But I think she's very flexible. She basically works on all possible Dendro teams and is a great floor and is totally enough free to 36-star the Abyss. So yeah, if you like Yao Yao, you should definitely build her. And if you want to save your resources and not get something else, then she's a great character to build for that. And she's also very cheap to build. So even if you do build her and end up replacing her, it's not that much of a loss. Let's talk about her build guide next. For Yao Yao's build guide, you want to level her to 90 if you're using her in a Nilou Bloom team. Otherwise, you can leave her at 80. You can even leave her at 70. You might struggle to get enough healing if you go too low, but you definitely don't need her to go to 90 unless you're doing Nilou Bloom teams specifically with Candace. If you're not doing them with Candace, then you can just leave her level 80 because she's not going to be actually the Hydro unit proccing blooms, but she functions as the Hydro unit in the Nilou team. So if you're using Candace. So for talents, you don't need to level up her normals at all unless maybe you're doing some sort of plunge burn plunge with Shenyan. I haven't tested that. I don't try this at home. But you just want to focus on her skill and burst for the healing. I have mine at super low levels and I just haven't needed to level them up anymore. I think for maybe Nilou teams it would be beneficial for me to level them up more. I would definitely go maybe 7-7 so they would look like 10-10 after the constellations, but that's why I know that she's good at C0 because you can easily get them to 8 even at C0 and it's still totally fine. Like the constellations just basically saved me resources because her healing is still very good. If you're fighting really tough abysses as well, like that do a lot of damage, it can be helpful to get the talents up more. So as someone who plays Yao Yao a lot, I would probably go for 7-7 before the constellations, but if you're comfortable, you can get away with less. For weapons, definitely Kitane Crossbeer is often a good option for, well, not often a good option. It's her best option for Nilou teams, so she can get energy and elemental mastery. So highly recommend Kitane Crossbeer for Nilou teams. Otherwise on Nilou teams, you can go with Dragon's Bane, but you might suffer with energy. It depends on your team if you're running some Fab on the rest of your team. Rightful Reward is the craftable for Fontaine, and Kitane is the craftable for Inazuma. That's also a good option because it gives some HP and it gives her energy, so that's really nice. Oftentimes, you won't be bursting every rotation, such as on Aggravate teams, so something like Black Tassel or the Sumeru craftable, the Moon Piercer, are really good for either giving more healing or more buffing or both. The Staff of Homa does give HP, but that's pretty big waste, so definitely don't particularly recommend ever putting the Staff of Homa for Yao Yao. I generally just go with Fav. Big surprise, but I think that all the other options I mentioned are good as well. She has a lot of really good free-to-play options. You just have to find the one that gives the right stats for you. For artifacts on Nilou teams, of course, you're going to want to run Flowers of Paradise Lost with full EM, or Gilded Dreams is really not very much of a loss, and even 2 PCM is totally fine as well. If you're not using her on Nilou Bloom teams, and you're using her maybe as the second Dendro on a Hytham team, Deepwood Memories is definitely the best, so she can shred the Dendro resistance, or on Nilou Bloom teams where she's not the one proccing the blooms, you could use Deepwood. But even then, I find that personally, I like instructors a lot. It can be a bit tricky because you might not have as much stats and as much healing as you would, but I've still always found it fine. I like instructors a lot, especially in aggravate teams, because buffing 120 elemental mastery for the whole team is like really, really good. So big fan of instructors. You can use tenacity. She procs tenacity completely fine, especially on aggravate teams. I don't know. I think this is not better than instructors damage wise, but you'll get more HP, not only because of the 5-star sets, but like the stats, but also because of the 2-piece set bonus. So that's really nice. I know you can build her as an off-field DPS, and you can use like Deathmatch and Staff of Homa and all this stuff. I just don't think her multipliers are really good enough to justify using her as an off-field DPS, but if you really want to, it's sort of the usual suspects, right? Deepwood Memories, Gilded Dreams, Staff of Homa, Catane Cross Spear for free to play, Staff of Scarlet Sands, Deathmatch. It's not something I recommend, but it is something I guess you do. For future prospects, I'm pretty sure she just stays right where she is. She's always going to play second fiddle to Baiju, which is totally fine. She's not that much worse, and she has a couple unique things. As new characters come out, maybe we get new burning stuff, maybe we get new hyperbloom stuff. I mean, I could see her improving, but I don't see her like making a massive shift in the meta. But as I said, I think she's a very good character, and she's one of my favorite, you know, free-to-play staple characters to recommend. If someone builds an aggravate team, then it's like she's like, if you think about it like this, like, sure, she's worse than Baiju, yeah, but if you're using her on an aggravate team, like Yaimiko, Fischl, Yao, Kazuha is just such an efficient team, or even Kaching, right? Like, or Lisa, or whatever. Yao, Fischl, Kazuha, or even Yao, Fischl, Sucrose is just such an efficient use of resources, and now you can focus, like, so many other characters onto your second team. So I think she's just a really valuable free-to-play character. She gives so much value for what you have to put into her. Like, you barely have to level her up. She has so many free-to-play artifacts, so many free-to-play weapons. I think she doesn't need that much Constellations to really shine. She's just a very good free-to-play character, and she's like the benchmark of what 4 stars should be without them being broken. If I had to put her onto the tier list, well, actually, if you want to see where I put her on the tier list, stay tuned for the end of this video where I'll tell you. I'll link it. For Overworld, she's great in the Overworld. The healing is perfect. The Dendro application is perfect. You could do Hyperbloom, you could do Aggravate in the world. She has a great passive for Overworld for sneaking up on crystal flies, and she doesn't have to be active. So even though she's a small model, she's a great Overworld character. Overall, great free-to-play character. You can get her for free from the Lantern Rite. Maybe you have her from picking her up. Maybe like if you get Yai, like you've got a perfect match already. You use Sucrose for now, keep an eye out for Kazuha. If you don't have Sucrose, I should have mentioned this in the team section. You can use someone else. You can use Lynette, or if you have Shenyun, that's a good option as well. But I'm a big fan of Yao in terms of what she represents. She's just one of the staple free-to-play characters. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you've built her, and check out my tier list to see where she falls on there. Take care. Bye for now.